In the early hours of November 13th, 2022, a quiet college town in Moscow, Idaho, was about to become the center of one of the most shocking murder investigations in modern American history. 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were found dead inside an off-campus home. As news spread across the country, investigators faced an enormous challenge. There was no identified suspect. No murder weapon had been recovered. No clear explanation for who had committed the crime or why. But hidden among thousands of tips, surveillance videos, digital records, and microscopic pieces of evidence was a trail that investigators believed would eventually lead them to one man. This is the story of how investigators say they identified Bryan Kohberger, piece by piece, clue by clue, evidence by evidence. By sunrise, investigators understood they weren't dealing with an ordinary crime scene. Crime scene investigators immediately began securing the property and carefully documenting every possible piece of evidence. Every photograph, every fingerprint, every item, and every detail could become a crucial part of the investigation. Within hours, tips and information began pouring in from across the community. Phone calls flooded into investigators, witnesses came forward, security cameras from nearby homes and businesses were collected for review. Every phone call, every witness, and every surveillance camera had the potential to reveal what had happened that night. Inside the command center, detectives worked around the clock, organizing thousands of leads and carefully examining every piece of information. But with so many possible leads, investigators still didn't know which one would become the breakthrough they were searching for. With no identified suspect, investigators turned their attention to the evidence. They collected surveillance footage from homes, businesses, traffic cameras, and anywhere else that might have captured activity near the crime scene. Detectives spent countless hours reviewing video, frame by frame, searching for anything that didn't belong. Then, one detail began to stand out. A white Hyundai Elantra appeared on multiple surveillance cameras during the early morning hours. At that stage of the investigation, detectives did not know who owned the vehicle. They did not know who had been driving it, and they had not connected it to any specific person. But investigators believed the occupants of that vehicle might have information that could help explain what had happened that night. The search for the white Hyundai Elantra quickly became one of the investigation's highest priorities. Law enforcement publicly asked for help locating the vehicle, and the requests spread rapidly across the country. Thousands of tips began pouring in. Most would lead nowhere. But one would eventually point investigators toward the next major breakthrough. As investigators continued following the trail of the white Hyundai Elantra, the investigation began to narrow. Vehicle registration records led detectives to a white Hyundai Elantra, owned by a Washington State University graduate student named Bryan Kohberger. But investigators knew that owning a similar vehicle was not enough to identify a suspect. The investigation was far from over. According to court documents, detectives expanded their investigation by examining additional evidence. They analyzed historical cell phone records, surveillance footage, and other digital evidence to better understand the movements connected to the case. Then came another critical development. Investigators recovered DNA from a knife sheath found at the crime scene. According to court records, that DNA profile was later compared with additional evidence collected during the investigation. As investigators continued assembling the evidence, the vehicle, the cell phone analysis, and the DNA findings all pointed in the same direction. What had once been thousands of unanswered questions was becoming one focused investigation. Investigators believed they finally had enough evidence to move forward. The next step would change the case forever. By late December 2022, investigators believed they had assembled enough evidence to move forward. Before sunrise on December 30th, law enforcement officers quietly surrounded a home in Chestnut Hill Township, Pennsylvania. After weeks of surveillance and careful planning, the operation was ready to begin. Within minutes, officers entered the residence. Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. The arrest marked the end of one phase of the investigation, but the beginning of another. He was later transported to face the charges brought against him. As news of the arrest spread across the country, cameras gathered outside the courthouse, and millions followed every new development. Bryan Kohberger later appeared in court as prosecutors outlined the evidence they had assembled during the investigation. The case would continue through the judicial process for more than 2 years. In 2025, Bryan Kohberger entered guilty pleas to the murders, avoiding a capital trial. Later that month, the court sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with an additional sentence for burglary. For the families, no sentence could undo what had happened. But the investigation that began with thousands of unanswered questions had finally reached its conclusion. From surveillance footage to vehicle analysis to digital evidence to DNA, investigators pieced together hundreds of clues until the evidence told a single story. Because in the end, it wasn't one clue that solved the case. It was every clue working together. This is Dark Truth, where every clue has a story.